Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today it's time. Today we complete the grand finale, the last episode of our Rimworld adventure in the Tropical Rainforest with the Believers of Boyo. And it is going to be a long one because we are planning to finish this series as soon as Ellie celebrates her 13th birthday, which will happen in about 18 in-game days. Now, normally we get through somewhere between 8 to 12 days per episode, so today we have a slightly more ambitious task ahead of us, but considering that this is the grand finale, I think that suits us just fine. Now, last time we left off, after an unexpectedly devastating impet attack, Tuk lost his leg and we were also struck by toxic fallout, so a nice green tint welcomes us as we start things off here today. Also in the last episode, we saw the birth of Elephant Vicary, and by popular demand, he will now receive the title of Vicar. So Vicar, Vicary, now elephant number, I honestly have lost count. Suffice it to say, the toxic fallout could be an interesting challenge for our animal population. And since the toxic fallout will also drive all wild animals on the map away soon, I think it's time to test out the Biosculptor pod now. In a 7-day-long procedure, we are now going to reverse the age of the colony's oldest, Maniac. Granted, this will only shave off 1 year, but on the bright side, it will allow him to celebrate his 80th birthday twice. While he's in there, he obviously won't need any weapons, so let's leave those for somebody else to use, while Maniac now undergoes the week-long procedure. Now, full disclosure, my original plan was actually to show you the bioregeneration feature. That one, however, would take roughly 22 days, even with a completely sterile room, and we haven't even researched it yet, so I suppose that will be something to explore in the next series. In the meantime, we also took 2 prisoners near the end of the last episode who are now being converted. One of our latest recruits, Shandy, currently on the job, although compared to Kevin, she's not making much progress. Another aftermath of last episode's impet attack then, Light losing his lover, a person that was previously completely unknown to us. Now, however, the loss has driven him into a tantrum, one that we can quickly end, however, with Brandon's word of serenity. The rest of the day then remains largely uneventful. As you can see, nighttime here barely distinguishable, the green tint just a little darker as our colonists head off to bed, and on the next morning we start bringing in another mushroom harvest, at least those are unaffected by the fallout. However, that is honestly the most exciting thing that happens on this day, which I guess is good considering that we have plenty more still left to go, and we also still need to convert 3 of our own colonists to our ideology. Unfortunately though, Kevin's abilities here not quite enough, as Skark remains convinced in her old ways, at least barely. In the very early morning hours then, the bioregeneration project is completed. Like I said though, just because of its duration we will not see it in this series. What we might however need before we make the cut is fire foam, a very good suggestion from last episode's comments. Considering just how much damage those impets did, I think this is a handy project to pursue. Not to mention that our 2 worshipped sanguophages as well as the recently gene-modded Maniac all have their problems with fire, so plopping down those 2 fire foam poppers that we salvaged from an enemy base ages ago is the least we can do. And here you can also see it again, a bioregeneration cycle would take roughly 22 days to complete, and that's just a bit longer than the time we have left in this series. Our proselytizing ways then in full effect a few hours later. Where Kevin failed with the conversion attempt, Kyle now succeeds. In a random conversation, Skark has been turned to the Believers of Boyo, and so only Moorg and John remain, and that's 2 out of a current number of 18 colonists, which actually makes this the largest colony I have ever played, although at this size it does get overwhelming at times, so I think for me as the player too, we have reached a good point to wrap up the series. However, before we get to that, there is still plenty of work left to do. We now have fire foam unlocked and we might as well continue down that path all the way towards the foam turret. Spraying those impets with fire foam might be something we want to do, and researching blowback operation and gun turrets along the way shouldn't hurt either. In the late evening then, a daring adventure by Nazim. Despite the fallout, he wanders out to hunt some boomalopes. I guess as a psychopath he does make strange decisions from time to time. Either way, the animal is quickly killed and with that we secure a bit more meat, although there is a chance for animal corpses who already have toxic buildup in their systems to rot immediately, so I guess in this instance we got lucky. And lucky will also be Patreon supporter Evie Wrath, who now gets another elephant named after them, and since we won't have a next episode I suppose I'll have to pick the title myself, and Emperor Evie strikes me as properly royal. Out in the fallout, we then also begin constructing another deep drilling shelter, this one here for steel, which we are actually lacking at the moment. Our plasteel drilling meanwhile has brought in some good results. We are also making rapid progress on the research front, blowback operation now completed, and that means gun turrets is up next, although progress might be a bit slower this time as level 20 researcher Vulek has started a fight with Squigs. Now, unsurprisingly, our sanguophage emerges as the victor, Squigs meanwhile suffering quite heavily, probably because sanguophages have the strong melee damage gene, so unlike Vulek, it will most likely take her a few days to recover from this. As Tuk then tries his luck with a few already downed alpacas, we have things get worse as a solar flare strikes the jungle. Definitely not what we were looking for in the middle of a toxic fallout, so Maniac now stuck in his biosculpting pod without making any progress, and research is also halted because all of our advanced research benches require power. And that's not to mention the meals slowly thawing inside of our freezer, the perfect opportunity I think for Light to give a strong leader speech. Hopefully he will be able to rally his colonists in these dark times. At the very least, a brave visitor comes wandering in through the fallout. We'll see what they have to trade in just a moment. For now, Light improves his social skill to level 9 and concludes an encouraging leader speech. That results in a +5 mood bonus for all participants, and we can now send out Kevin to do some trading. Admittedly though, it's not a lot and we're just selling some stuff to earn ourselves the meager amount of 150 silver. However, a short moment later we are actually returning because I saw something that interests me, 3 reinforced barrels to be precise. Now, purchasing these will require a bit more of an investment, but as you can see we do have the goods to make this work, and so we now obtain 3 additional barrels that we can use to make mortars with. In addition to the 3 we already have lying around in our storage room, that now makes it 6, enough I think to slightly expand our mortar battery, that is once we acquire enough steel. In the meantime, gun turrets have been unlocked as well, and so we can now begin working on the foam turret. The solar flare obviously has vanished already, and so at least in that regard things are back to normal. Barely 5 hours later then, the foam turret is unlocked too, so once we construct a few, impet's perhaps not as much of a threat. For our next research project then, I think let's go with something extremely simple. Since we are playing underneath the mountain, there was no reason so far to unlock carpet making, but it might be of some use down the line. At this point then, we have another very interesting decision to make, because sanguophage Vulek here is almost done regrowing his genes, and that means we can now implant them into somebody else. And well, I have decided that we are going to pick Wyatt for this. In my opinion, he will benefit tremendously. At the moment, he is disliked by pretty much everyone in the colony because of his staggeringly ugly trait. Turning him into a sanguophage in a colony with the blood-feeding meme will change that. It will also make his melee damage output even stronger, his melee skill also immediately receiving a +4 skill increase. Should he get injured, he will heal quickly and from this point onwards also cannot die, and that's not to mention the bonus he gets to his psychic abilities. All in all, I think a well-deserved reward for one of the more important colonists in this series, who will now hopefully finally receive the adoration of his peers. In the meantime, we continue working on converting those last 2 colonists, John and Mook. As you can see, I have also placed a small feeding station for our boomalopes. The elephants are still regularly fed by our colonists because we are training them. The boomalopes, meanwhile, are entirely relying on grass, and as you can imagine, that has become increasingly hard to find. Just as Squigs makes a full recovery, we then also receive the good news that we finally know how to make carpets. And after a bit of thinking, I have decided that our next research project will be the long-range mineral scanner. I don't believe we've actually used that in any of our Rimworld series so far. However, especially since we have access to drop pods and the Farskip Psycast, it can be utilized to great effectiveness. Let's see if I can show you that before we wrap things up here. One thing you may have also noticed at this point, the green tint is gone, and so the toxic fallout is officially over. I actually do not remember receiving a notification about it, I certainly do not have anything recorded. Either way, it is now replaced by a foggy rain. As we now collect a bit more steel, the construction of our new mortar battery has cost us quite a bit. In the evening then, we also start replacing some of our broken turrets, now that we have the research project for it unlocked. But once again, steel and components are a bit of a bottleneck for us at the moment. Hopefully Maniac will be back soon to speed up our mining operations. In anticipation of Wyatt joining our sanguophage ranks, we then also make some modifications to our death resting chamber, and with everything in place, Vulek can begin his next death rest. Our sanguophage bedrooms, meanwhile, also need a slight overhaul, which in turn unfortunately means that the ones for Light and Vulek will become a tiny bit smaller, but I would like all 3 of our sanguophages to fit in here. Since our colonists are revering them, I think it makes sense to give them a special place. As sanguophage and colony leader, meanwhile, Light will of course receive the slightly larger bedroom in the middle, and while that is being finished, an exotic goods trade ship arrives, so let's see what kind of deals we can make this time. And this time we are going all in, selling everything we can spare within the range of our orbital trade beacon, because we are grabbing a few exciting things here. First of all, to further our recreation of the sanguophage, we grab the Tinder Skin gene pack. This one obviously a negative trait, granting the receiver fire vulnerability. On top of it all, we then also purchase another Archite capsule and the Psi Trainer for the Brain Exploder. This a Psycast from the Combat Psycasts mod, and it does pretty much what the name suggests, allowing us to instantly kill a single humanoid target, albeit in exchange for a massive increase in neural heat. It also takes a whole 5 seconds to cast, so it's not like you can flick it at anyone, and since it only applies to a single target, I also don't feel like it's totally overpowered. Not to mention that it is of course a level 6 Psycast, so at the moment only Light and Wyatt will be able to learn it. A few hours later then, Nazim in more trouble with an angry rhinoceros, and I have to say he has picked an awfully poor spot to make a stand. Still, there is no need to worry, because this time we have jump packs, and so Nazim can quickly hop out of harm's way. The rhino is then taken out after successfully being lured back to the base, and with that we can skip ahead to the next morning, where we begin another small construction project. I think double layering our exterior walls is a sensible idea at this stage of the series, just so that any potential breaching raids take a little while longer to get through, although I am of course hoping that we do not have to deal with one before the series is over. In the evening then, a Maniac awakens from his age reversal cycle, and so he is now back to the ripe young age of 79, and thus able to celebrate his 80th birthday yet again. He also receives a small +3 mood bonus for undergoing the age reversal. It will last for a whole 4 days though. And so, revitalized, he goes out at night to go hunting together with Nazim. As always on the menu, rhinos. And this time around we only need the 2 of them. Thanks to the nightly accuracy bonus and 2 formidable sniper rifles, we make quick work of our targets. Back at the base, meanwhile, we slightly rearrange things again in our hospital so that we can now outfit it with a vitals monitor. It can only attach to the 2 hospital beds, not to the royal bed that we somehow still have in here. But construction is quickly completed and the device powered up, so that at least those 2 hospital beds now get a slight stat increase. As we then watch Nudist Moork at the deep drill, something I get very uncomfortable just thinking about, we finish the research of the long-range mineral scanner, so I suppose we will construct one shortly. In the meantime, let's begin with gas operation. Obviously, we are not too much into weapon crafting, but precision rifling down here seems fitting. After all, the sniper rifle has been an important tool for hunting. Construction of the long-range mineral scanner then actually consumes 2 advanced components. Luckily, we still have a good number of those in reserve, and so the device is quickly up and running. Before we get to use it though, first we convert John to the Believers of Boyo. Once again, we receive no development points because we are already maxed out, and at this point only Night Owl Nudist Moork is left, but over the next few days we should be able to get him too. Maniac then briefly occupies our new long-range mineral scanner, soon to be replaced by Vulek. You can see it here, unlike the ground-penetrating scanner, we can tune it to an actual material. In this case, we are looking for components. Yes, I know we can make them ourselves, but grabbing a big pile of them from somewhere else might ease our workload. At night then, it is alpaca hunting time. Those don't offer quite as much resistance as elephants and rhinos, and on the following morning we complete the gas operation research project, so let's keep going with precision rifling to unlock the sniper rifle. In the midst of a small storage room improvement, we then also convert one of our prisoners, and so, since we have no further use for them, we will now release them. Heavily armored Kyle escorts them out of the base, and a few moments later they leave the map. However, we do not receive any faction relation bonuses for it. Now, at this point, we are going to perform a small procedure. We are now going to remove the psychic reader from Brandon's brain. We purchased this implant mainly for the trade price improvement, because back then Knight Brandon was our only link to the Empire. At this point, though, we can simply use Kevin to trade with them, and he does get much better prices. So we are now going to install the implant into Light's brain, who will actually benefit from both the trade price improvement as well as the social impact bonus. I will show you what I mean once Light recovers from the anesthetic. In the meantime, another night sets across the jungle, and that means it's time to hunt. So here we are then, a good chunk into the next day. Light is back up on his feet, and if we pull up the numbers mod here, then we can see he has now actually become our best trader. All of that despite a social skill of only 9, the simple reasons his absolutely massive psychic sensitivity of over 400%, which then also massively increases the impact of the psychic reader, not to mention that as colony leader he also gets a flat plus 2% bonus to trade prices. And so let's stick him into a transport pod and fill it to the brim with trade goods. Nothing unusual here, meals, chem fuel, animal hides. We are also selling an LMG and a prosthetic arm, and a few of Wyatt's handcrafted dusters too. Now, as always, it takes a few hours until all of that is loaded up, but in the early evening we are good to go, and we are once again going to visit our good friends of the Anim faction for this. Let's see what they have to offer. To get things started, selling all of our goods makes us a neat 3,300 silver. Silver that we will first of all spend on a crafting skill trainer, just so that we don't rely too much on only Wyatt. Now the gene packs here then are not really what we are looking for, however we will grab another death rest capacity serum. And money-wise that gets us pretty much exactly where we want to be, so let's confirm the transaction and fast skip Light back home. Now the 2 items he just brought back will at this point both be used by Vulek. The Death Rest Capacity Serum I think is obvious. The Crafting Skill Trainer meanwhile I think also makes a lot of sense, bumping his Double Passion crafting skill up from 11 to 15, thus making him the second best crafter in the colony right behind Wyatt, and I think that's a skill that definitely pairs nicely with his level 20 intellectual skill. With the trade fulfilled, Light meanwhile can now begin his Death Rest, as we begin another slight overhaul of our hospital. Unfortunately, we will have to squeeze in a few more facilities for gene modifications, as we need to construct 3 more gene processors to be able to combine all of those genes we have collected. Undeterred by the construction, meanwhile, our researchers unlock precision rifling, so if we wanted to, we could now manufacture our own sniper rifles. And for our next and potentially last project, I think we will unlock geothermal power. We actually have a steam vent right in front of the base entrance, and obviously all of these machines here do require a bit of juice. Just in that moment, prisoner number 2 is then converted as well, and so we can now also send them on their merry way to empty our prison cells again, although who knows for how long. Now at this point, even though our gene modding station is exactly where we want it to be, we are not going to start work immediately. Instead, we will pay one more trade visit to the Empire, just on the off chance that perhaps they have 1 or 2 more genes that we might want to include. As you can see, in terms of trade goods, we are going all out here with jade, synth thread and all the valuables. And after giving our 2 pod launchers a bit of extra fuel, we are then good to go. This time we are traveling to the second Empire settlement in our vicinity. From the first one we already bought everything of interest. And despite Brandon's presence, the trader for this transaction will be Kevin, who first of all earns us over 4,000 silver from selling what we brought. And well, it is the last episode, so I think we can afford to go all out here. I have found a Persona monosword that I really like. It comes with 2 incredible traits, Psychic Hypersensitizer and Calm Thoughts, so huge boosts to psychic sensitivity and mood, and I actually have a few candidates in mind that this might be suitable for. And just because we can, we will also grab a plant skill trainer now, although I'm not going to tell you just yet who that one is for, as that might just spoil a bit of the surprise about who comes with us for the next series. The same thing is true, by the way, for that monosword. I have an idea already on who is going to receive it, but I am not going to spoil that just yet. Instead, we can finally begin. Let's assemble some genes, or rather all of them. And yes indeed, apart from the voice and skin genes here, these are in fact all genes that you would also find on a sanguophage. Assembling this xenogerm will require 2 archite capsules, and we are going to name it after one more Patreon supporter. From here on out, carriers of this xenotype will be known as viscalaire, which to me sounds a lot more mysterious than bloodless sanguophage. Assembling this xenotype will now take a grand total of 16 hours, or only 6 if you leave Volek to it. Having a level 20 researcher does have its benefits. And so on the next morning the work is done, the viscalaire xenogerm is complete, and we are now once again selecting Maniac as the recipient. My apologies if you had hoped for somebody else. I think at this point it has become quite clear that Maniac will in fact join us for the next series too, and I simply didn't want to implant this on someone who we will leave behind in just a few days anyway. And so Maniac, with his skin turning blue, now officially becoming the first member of the viscalaire xenotype. Definitely a more noticeable change, but one that could potentially be very, very powerful. In the late afternoon then we begin mining some more steel, not because we need it, just to drive colony wealth back up. At the moment we are slightly below the threshold of 275,000 silver, but 1 or 2 days of mining and collecting valuables should easily get us back on track. And so we skip ahead to yet another morning. My apologies, there really isn't all that much interesting stuff happening at the moment. Here an almost 13-year-old Ellie can be seen improving her intellectual skill at the long-range mineral scanner. It will be her birthday in just a few days, and that will mark the point for us to wrap things up. But until then, we may have plenty more surprises in store, such as this one for example, Krayleth falling in love with Brandon, thus now turning her back on Took, whose marriage she more or less destroyed, and who therefore might now be granted a chance to reunite with Squiggs, although for the next 25 days he will also suffer from a nasty -20 mood penalty, a mood penalty that is certainly not without irony. Either way, Brandon and Krayleth meanwhile are pretty much ready to move in together almost immediately. Whether or not we do want to put Took and Squiggs back together, however, that remains to be seen. Their relationship at the moment is definitely not bad, they certainly don't hate each other. Squiggs here also seems to have forgiven him for the affair, at least the relationship penalty is no longer there, but still it may take them a few more days before they are ready to sleep together again. One way or another, our colonists will be confined to tight spaces for a little while, as we have a pack of 42 manhunting rhinos up here. Definitely a bit of an ironic twist of fate here. After hunting them for the majority of the series, now they come back to hunt us. Randy certainly knows how to tell a good story. Needless to say, even though we probably could find some way to do so, we are not going to fight them. They will leave again in a day or two, no need for us to take any unnecessary risks. Instead, we are using Kevin's Word of Joy Psycast on Light now, who is still very sad about the loss of his lover. And as you can imagine, this here might not be the best time to have our colony leader suffer a mental break. Indeed, not the best time at all, as we are now also struck by an infestation, and from the looks of it, it's quite the large one. So the game throwing everything at us here to make this a spicy finale. Now, as Light casts his combat command, we are going to make our stand here right in front of the hospital. In part, of course, also to protect Maniac, who is still in the gene implantation coma. And even though he cannot die, he might still be able to lose a limb or two, something that I would like to prevent from happening. Now, the benefit of this strategy is that most of the insects have spawned a bit deeper into the base, which is certainly convenient considering that we can be attacked from 3 sides here. On the downside, however, that also leaves the bulk of the insects plenty of time to destroy our base, including valuable equipment like Volek's Death Rest casket. And so, slowly but steadily, we are moving our forces forward. At this point, commanded by Squiggs, we also have the first of our elephants join the party, which is definitely helping to protect our colonists, especially those fighting in melee, but it does also put the animals into a considerable risk. As you can see, the insects clearly outnumber our elephants, and especially those hives still tightly packed in our bedrooms can be a significant threat, and so it is no surprise to see the first elephants downed already. The first elephant death, however, unfortunately comes at our own hands, killed by friendly fire and by no one else but Ellie. Duke Kalanur unfortunately does not survive the fight. Let us hope that they remain the only one. And indeed, at this point it does look like the fighting is starting to slow down a bit. 1 or 2 bugs might still be left alive. It's a bit difficult to see with all of those elephants roaming around, but I think it is safe to say that this infestation has been eradicated. Our sanguophages Light and Vulek at this point liberally using their coagulate abilities to ensure that we do not suffer any further casualties. I don't think we need to add any more loss to the stress that will be cleaning up this mess, even though it did also earn us roughly 1000 units of insect jelly. Now, after a few hours of cleanup, our efforts are rewarded by a small quest. We have completed a similar one not too long ago. This time a death rest capacity serum is waiting to be collected, and I think if we send in one of our psychcasters to collect it, there shouldn't be much the unknown threat here can do to us. Still, first things first, there is a lot of work left to do at home right now, and the timely arrival of a combat supplier trade ship might at least help us get rid of some of that insect jelly. Unfortunately though, not a whole lot of it is currently in range of our orbital trade beacon, and so 827 silver is the most we can earn at the moment. After a few more hours of hauling, however, we have a much healthier supply, and so we can now also grab the trader's remaining funds, just as we are struck by a heatwave, as if things weren't already bad enough. Luckily, underneath the mountain, this shouldn't affect us too much, at least that's what I'm hoping. I think we did survive one heatwave before in this series, so for the most part I think we should be fine. And I suppose at this point Randy just wants to mess with us. Yes, that is a second wave of manhunting rhinos, this time even more than in the first group, and so at the moment we have some 90 plus of them on the map, just as the first group was beginning to wander off. So I suppose we will remain inside for a little while longer. In the early morning hours, Dimitri buries Duke Calanur, just as a group of cargo pods crashes down. 138 units of bison wool, we will not be able to grab those anytime soon, so it will have to be left to the elements at least for the moment. Unsurprisingly then, I think, the day is spent mostly with rebuilding and cleaning up, and there is unfortunately a whole lot of work to do. Still, especially in a situation like this, it is important to be able to relieve some stress, and so in the evening our colonists find some time to celebrate. In our shameful shrine, a pain party begins. At this point, as you can see, all of our colonists have also recovered from their wounds. Luckily, none of the injuries to our pawns were too severe. And so, perhaps because of the unique circumstances, the party ends up being unforgettable. A +8 mood bonus for 6 days, definitely very welcome. And the cherry on top, even more insect jelly, although the 40 units here somewhat pale in comparison to what we have already collected. And just like that, it is suddenly time, as if the pain party was a birthday celebration. Ellie turns 13 years old. Once again, she has successfully made it to growth level 8, so we can once again select 3 passions and 1 trait, and this here is what I ended up choosing. For passions, we are going with construction and animals, just to give Ellie a bit of her mother's side too, although these 2 skills will most likely not be her priority. That might be a different story for the social skill, which we are now doubling down on. And for traits, there wasn't really a whole lot of interesting stuff to choose from. In the end, I went with Night Owl because I think it kind of fits. Having spent her whole life in the darkness underneath the mountain, nighttime might just suit Ellie better. And for the rest, I didn't really have a good in-game explanation either. So, here we are now, Ellie, 13 years old, and that means it's time to equip some proper clothing. And not only that, she will now also apply all of those tech prints we have been collecting. In total, we have 5 of them still sitting in our storage room. Once applied, each one of them will give her 2000 experience points towards the intellectual skill, which should be good enough to give her 1 or 2 level increases. And so, after unlocking skin hardening, specialized limbs, and compact weaponry too, we are then informed that the research of geothermal power has been completed. And with that, I think we have also completed the last research project of this series. At this point, unlocking anything further would really just make things easier for the next series, and since we're going to use a small mod to take all of these already unlocked projects with us into the next series anyway, we are already giving ourselves a good head start, so this is as far as we'll go with the Believers of Boyo. Ellie, meanwhile, after applying the tech print for cataphract armor, reaches intellectual skill level 11, and at 13 years young already looks like a very capable colonist. By the way, at this point the game does officially consider her an adult, and so I think you can imagine where this is going. Once you become an adult, it is sooner or later time to move out, and that is exactly what Ellie is about to do. Before she embarks on the next chapter of this journey, however, let's get the base cleaned up just a little bit more. John and Dimitri also start picking a fight with each other, as if the insects weren't enough already. Thankfully though, it is over quickly and nobody suffers any injuries worth mentioning. At this point, we are also actually installing a cooler for our animal stables. We do have a cozy 75 degrees Celsius inside, probably best if we get that down a bit, otherwise we might risk losing another animal after all. By the way, we do still have that one very small quest to complete. No, I have not forgotten about the death rest capacity serum waiting for us somewhere in the jungle, so let's stick Light into a transport pod and send him on his way. I am confident that he should be able to handle this on his own, even if we have a nasty surprise waiting for us. To get us started at least, the map is clear of any hostiles. The location of our treasure is also very clearly marked, so let's head over there and see if we run into anything or anyone. And indeed we do, it was to be expected. We are being ambushed by mechanoids no less. However, they are moving in from the edge of the map. And we also have this small building here to provide us with cover while they get closer. So let's run inside, grab the death rest capacity serum and then get out of here. We should be gone before the first scyther gets to us. And indeed, there we are, able to escape just in time. Light teleports himself back home and lands right in the middle of a fungus harvest. And we now have one more death rest capacity serum for Vulek to ingest. Final order of business then, before we call it quits, let's convert Murk. And with our nudist night owl now believing in Boyo too, I think we are ready to go. So after the last of the dead bugs have been hauled out of our shameful shrine, and with another night about to set across the jungle, our colonists assemble, all 18 of them, to say goodbye to a select 5 who will now continue their journey elsewhere. And so we are about to say goodbye to the Believers of Boyo, to the colony of Red Chapel, and to the Tropical Rainforest. And with that, let's have the first of those 5 colonists step forward. No surprises here, I think. It's Ellie and Elpis. To me, this honestly was an easy decision, one that I think was set in stone pretty much from the beginning. Obviously, Ellie's story has only just begun, not to mention that of her younger brother Elpis. For these two, I don't really think they are leaving on bad terms. In Ellie's case, I think it is simply part of growing up, and it simply feels cruel to split the siblings, so that's why Elpis is coming along too. And I know that I have already spoiled this next one too, joining Ellie and Elpis, no, not their parents, but Maniac. I would like to imagine that Maniac has taken on some sort of a grandfatherly role for these two. After all, he has shared a long-standing bond with their father, his hunting buddy Took, and he also knows both Took and Squigs from the first series, reason enough I believe for the two of them to trust him with their offspring. And that's not to mention that as a Viscalaire, Maniac himself is literally unkillable, so there are definitely worse people to accompany and protect your children on their exodus. Maniac himself then might also have a few reasons to leave. After all, he is a jealous bully. He probably did his best to suppress that during his time in the colony, but there is no denying that the recent gene modifications have also given him a substantial amount of new power that goes far beyond his already formidable combat abilities. And so that is why I'm convinced that he will gladly take on the task of protecting the two children, as will candidate number 4, the sanguophage Vulek. Now, first things first, it is very clear that Vulek does not particularly like Maniac. They're not enemies, but they're certainly not friends either. Still, I believe that Vulek would gladly jump on the opportunity for a fresh start. He is still only 23 years young, and yes, the Believers of Boyo are certainly worshipping him, but it is also very clear that he plays second fiddle behind Light. In an additional cruel twist of fate, his entire death resting setup was also destroyed in the infestation, while Light's mysteriously remained intact, and on top of all that, let's not kid ourselves, his past as a sanguophage has probably seen him live out his gift in many other ways than just helping people. And we have not even mentioned yet his most likely deep-rooted desire to continue to make technological discoveries. As a Steamworld tinker and a Navy tech officer with an intellectual skill of 20, there is still a lot of untapped potential there. And that brings us then to colonist number 5, Nazim. This was honestly a very difficult decision to make. I definitely wanted to pick one of the people who joined us later in the series, and once again Nazim too does not particularly like Maniac. Then again, for a psychopath mad scientist war chief, that's not really saying much. What I think is clear is that Nazim is not exactly cut out to be the charitable type, so I suppose his slightly more volatile tendencies do go along quite nicely with those of the others. In addition, he does come with a level 16 intellectual skill, enough to perhaps give him that same itch that Vulek also has for more advanced projects, not to mention that his mad scientist background does synergize extremely well with what I assume the Anomaly DLC is going to be like, because that is what these 5 here are going to face in the next series. Before we officially make the cut though, let's briefly give just a minute to those we are leaving behind, starting of course with the parents and perhaps protagonists of the series, Tuk and Squigs. Many of you actually wanted Tuk to come along for the next chapter, but now that Kraleth has found somebody else, it might be time to give old love another chance. Squigs apparently seems to have forgiven him. Perhaps they have bonded over the realization that their children are growing up, and now that the young are out of the house, that might just rekindle old feelings. That's not to mention that at least in Squigs' case, her undergrounder trait played a big part in us choosing a mountain base in the first place, and she has made it her home the only way she knows how, by making it the home of a whole bunch of animals too. Sanguophage Light then stays behind as the revered leader of the Believers of Boyo, a role that I think he will fulfill gladly for many years to come. Over the course of this series, he has made it his mission to defend this colony no matter the cost, and I don't really see a reason why he wouldn't continue to do so. The same is true for Dr. Kevin, literally incapable of violence. In my opinion, few others in this colony embody the spirit of Boyo the way he does. It definitely seems like charity is in his blood, so he too will remain as the colony's speaker of sacrifice. That brings us to Wyatt, now already in his 60s, but recently turned sanguophage, so age not really a concern to him. And unlike Vulek, I also think that he would be content being the second sanguophage behind Light. He is still not particularly well liked, but so far that hasn't bothered him too much. In Kyle he has found a great melee combat buddy, and really for Wyatt that seems to be all that matters. Dimitri then the guy I was honestly heavily considering instead of Nazim. As you may have noticed, we are embarking on this next chapter dangerously thin on the medical skill, but then I also figured that that medical skill is probably what will keep Dimitri here, as this is one of the best places to be a doctor, especially one who also likes to hang around with animals. Kyle then, industrious iron-willed mushroom farmer and melee specialist. Yes, he is technically incapable of caring for others, but at least in my opinion he is kind of doing so anyway through his farming work, and to be honest, he's just not that interesting of a character, so we are leaving him here for melee and mushrooms. Then we have Pretty Kraleth, Kevin's sister, and that alone might be reason enough for her to stay, and now that she has found love with Brandon, that might be another, even if that whole affair with Tuk is most likely going to hang over her head for a while. Speaking of Brandon, he has found his calling as a psycaster, not quite on the level of Light, but then again who is, and with 2 of the colony's primary researchers leaving, his skills will be even more in demand, not to mention that the Empire is most likely not done sending requests their way, possibly providing Brandon with even more opportunity to rise further through the royal ranks. Now, Skark, Moork, Shandy and John then joined us at a point where I really wasn't sure if I wanted to accept any more colonists. And sure, the upcoming Chapter 3 would have been the perfect opportunity to flesh out their characters a bit more. I have to be totally honest though, apart from the Night Owl nudist Moork, there's really not that much to work with here. Sure, they are not bad colonists by any means, but at least to me they also don't really bring anything to the table that our small adventuring party here would be looking for. As you can see, they are all especially lackluster in the combat department, and with Maniac sort of leading this expedition, I think those would be the skills that are heavily prioritized. And so here we are with our 5 pawns selected, and with one more role change still left to complete, we are now going to strip Maniac of his role of Mournful Miner, as that will then allow him to use the Plant Skill Trainer afterwards to bump his plant skill up to the very important level 8. As you may remember, the Mournful Miner role disabled that skill, and as a result also disables the use of associated skill trainers. Doing it this way, meanwhile, allows us to raise that skill up to a very important threshold, as level 8 now allows him to plant Heal Root, and I have a feeling that, considering what my plans are for the next series, we might want to have some of that. And so, with the dawn of a new morning, I think it is time. Let us accept Quest 2 of 3 of the Arconexus chain. The recent construction of a geothermal generator has just pushed us back over the edge wealth-wise, and so we can now confirm Ellie, Elpis, Maniac, Nazim and Vulek, our 5 colonists for chapter number 3. Now, we are not going to give them any animals this time around. The Staff of Sin obviously also remains with Light, and in terms of items, I am just going to reveal one that we are taking, that Persona Monosword that we just purchased. The other 4, however, will remain a secret until we actually launch that next series. I think showing them to you now might give away a bit too much. And so instead, we can now watch as our 5 protagonists walk off the map, a small cinematic scene if you will, to illustrate their exodus, and we will pick things back up with them very, very soon. For today, let's wrap things up with the final fan art showcase of this series. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. At times, I will admit, it did feel a bit transitional, if you will, but especially these last few weeks, it felt like the story picked up some steam again, and I am absolutely excited to see where Chapter 3 takes us. And so we finished the series with one last drawing from Isaac Young showing Tuk and Squiggs uncertain about their future. I suppose that's a question that we won't get an answer to, unless of course one of them pulls a maniac and just shows up anyway. And with that, let's make the cut. If you enjoyed the video and the series as a whole, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. And of course, you know the drill, if you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or perhaps secure your chance for naming rights in the next series by checking out and maybe even pledging to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.